Oh, okay. Good morning. I am here. Are you here? I am here. I'm mostly here. I'm partially here. Hello, Bueller. Awesome. All right. We got a party going on today. I am running a little bit late here, as you guys already know. Storms and kids are a wonderful combination. Not a good excuse, but it is my excuse. Anybody else have their kiddo climb in bed with them again due to these storms that just don't seem to stop? It's the real deal. No? Awesome. Got a yes and got a no. Let's see here. Share application screen. And we will be up and running. Let's get back over here. We kind of got, we don't need that. Open. All right. So basically, lecture one, I have completed already because I asked you guys to be able to go through a bunch of it with the narrated PowerPoint. And I hope you guys are able to get that done as soon as possible. And just please, 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 again, I'm not trying to take away time per se. I just don't have enough time in lecture to cover it as completely as I can, say, for instance, with the narrated PowerPoint on some of these ideas. But if any of it doesn't make sense, just contact me. I mean, I can make as much time available as you guys need. So I hope that's clear. You're not in this alone. I'm here to help. Just because we're not covering all of that in lecture doesn't mean I'm not willing to cover it with you. So today we got a couple of key ideas that we need to go through. We need to start going through each one of these organs, and we need to describe their function. We need to describe how the body is trying to control them, which is a really important idea in physiology, because let's redefine anatomy. Everybody, maybe not everybody remembers this, but let's assume that everybody remembers this. Anatomy is the study of structure. Your car has anatomy. Okay, a tree has anatomy. Everything has structure. So there's a lot of anatomy out there. We're looking at human anatomy. What is physiology? Go ahead, everybody, anybody in chat. What is physiology? Study of function. Wonderful. What do the two have in common? Just, I know hopefully this is something that was already ingrained in your head in AMP1, but I'm going to be saying it multiple times this semester. Why do we study anatomy and physiology? Why are those two studied together? You need one to understand the other, absolutely. They work together, yep, yep, yep. There's a short little phrase that really, yeah, form leads to function, Parker. That's another good way to look at it for sure. Structure determines function is even shorter. It's a shorter way to even learn this. So structure determines function, right? The structure of your car engine determines your car engine's function. I mean, it's really that simple. So as structures change, the function changes. Perfect. Is everybody clear on that? Why do we study anatomy and physiology? You've got to understand the anatomy in order to understand the physiology, because form determines function. And we're going to be dealing with that. As structures change in the body, well, damn, their function changes. It's a really cool, simple idea that we get to work with. Okay, here's a proof in the pudding here. Right here we have the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is just inferior to the thalamus. It's all part of the diencephalon. The hypothalamus has many functions. One of its functions is endocrine glandular tissue. So one of its functions is to make endocrine hormones. The hypothalamus is probably my favorite structure in the entire brain. It's such a small little area and it has so many functions. We won't get to talk about all the hypothalamic functions this semester, but I mean, really, the hypothalamus is just ridiculously important in homeostasis. So let's redefine homeostasis now that we said this key word again. What is homeostasis? Such an important part of physiology. What is homeostasis? Homeostasis. Asking you guys, what is homeostasis? Stable. Body's ability to stay regulated, regulating our body, stable temperature, environment. Yeah, temperature is often the one. Ooh, thank you, Veronica, for saying equilibrium. That's wrong, and I love that you said it because this is the one that students often mix up. So thank you for saying it. Everybody, equilibrium, don't ever say it. The body is never at equilibrium because equilibrium means equal. And if everything was equal, you'd be a pile of ooze on the ground. We need things to be perfectly, wonderfully unequal. Does that make sense? For instance, the inside of the cell has a ton of potassium and the outside of the cell has a bunch of sodium. Like, we need this disequilibrium. It's required. Homeostasis is the body's ability to maintain a stable, or actually a relatively stable, don't forget relatively, a relatively stable internal environment. That's the literal definition out of the textbooks, right? Body's ability to maintain a relatively stable internal environment. Melissa, I love the word dynamic because it's very dynamic. So relatively means, is it perfect? Is set point, right? You guys learn about this. Is everything always running along set point? Is everything perfect all the time? No, things aren't perfect all the time. Things aren't perfect all the time, and the body is constantly trying to monitor and regulate our set points. If things start getting too high, what's the body going to try to do? Increase, decrease, no change. And if something starts getting too low, what's the body going to try to do? Increase, decrease, no change. Lovely. The hypothalamus is one of the most important regulators of homeostasis, which means it has lots of receptors that help detect stimuli, changes. Okay, it's going to help regulate water balance and all sorts of other cool stuff, reproduction, salt balance. There's a lot of things that are going to be working their way through the hypothalamus. Now, there are other parts of the body that communicate with the hypothalamus, but the hypothalamus is going to do a big chunk of this. And the way that it does that is it is attached to the structure down below by something called the infundibulum. Yeah, I know, I'm weird. I always say things funny, but it helps me remember them. So if anybody's ever watched Princess Bride and they go, inconceivable, well, same syllabi and everything for infundibulum. So I got into a habit of saying infundibulum, like just like inconceivable, because, you know, I already had learned that. So it was an easy connection for me. So I got infundibulum, and the infundibulum is basically just an extension of axons. How do I know they're axons? Oh, who learned about white matter and gray matter in AMP1? Right, everybody, I think, learned about white matter and gray matter. Where white matter is white, because myelinated sheaths are white to the naked eye because they're comprised of cell membrane. It's myelination. So when you're looking in the brain and you see white stuff, we know that it is axons. And that's what we got here, coming down this infundibulum, and it's going to this portion of the pituitary gland down below. So if you look at the pituitary gland, can you see that the front is a different color than the back? Structure determines function, and if the structure changes, the function changes. Therefore, we have to differentiate between these two parts of the pituitary gland. One is towards the front, so we call it the anterior pituitary, and one is towards the back, so we call it the posterior pituitary. The hypothalamus is going to communicate with both the anterior and the posterior. But which one is it going to have a direct connection with via axons? The anterior or the posterior? Good. No, it's the posterior, because the posterior is white, the infundibulum is white, and that's connected to the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is going to be able to send electrical signals down to the posterior pituitary. Did that make sense? Is the connection there for y'all? The anterior pituitary needs something different. It doesn't have electricity to run it. So instead, it's going to have this tiny little microcirculation where the hypothalamus, let's not worry about what's going on the left here, let's look at the right, where the hypothalamus has neurons that make neurotransmitters. Where are those neurotransmitters made? They're made in the soma, they're made in the cell body, they're made near the nucleus. True story? Just we walked through this yesterday as our review. Okay, the nucleus has that DNA, the DNA is the library. We got transcription, translation, then we end up going out to the ribosomes, and then those proteins, the neurotransmitters are proteins. They're going to get packaged into vesicles, and then those vesicles are transported down to the terminal bouton. And that's what's going on up here, is that the neuron cell body is found up in the hypothalamus, and then the neurotransmitter will be transported down the axon to the posterior pituitary via those vesicles. And they just sit down here in the posterior pituitary inside those vesicles, and they wait for an electrical signal to tell them to go through exocytosis. Does that make sense? The anterior pituitary has to have a slightly different method. The reason why is because it's not directly attached. It's going to be attached via a blood circulation, a microcirculation here. It's called the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. Whew. Hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. What's going on here is the hypothalamus has other neurons, other cells that don't have big long axons. And these cells are going to be releasing hormones into the blood right here in something called the primary plexus. A plexus, so in a portal system, is basically a capillary bed that leads to another capillary bed. Don't worry about that too much. I won't test you on that too much in Unit 1. We'll be talking about plexuses so other times through the semester, and I'll focus more on what exactly they are. When we talk about microcirculation and we talk about nutrient exchange and stuff, I'll be dealing with discussing these. So now the hypothalamus is going to release its hormones into this primary plexus. And where is these hormones going to go? They get transported just a couple of centimeters down. Yeah, they're in the blood now. And because they're in the blood, they're going to get transported just a couple centimeters down. and there's receptors on the anterior pituitary for those hypothalamic hormones. Starting to get a little confusing, isn't it? Yeah. So let's organize ourselves. Let's organize ourselves. And I have a way to be able to do that. I have if I could write a textbook on flowcharts, I would. I just don't have enough time for that. All right. I love flowcharts. I really do. They will change your life if you trust me. I've had hundreds of students at this point tell me how much they've changed their lives for the better, and they've become, just much better, more efficient studiers because of them. So let's summarize all this crazy mess using key words. We start with the hypothalamus. Because that's where all this is originating, in this crazy hypothalamic pituitary axis thing. And the hypothalamus is going to be making hormones, quite a few of them. And from the hypothalamus, it's going to release those hormones into the portal system. So as it does, I'm just going to end up drawing in my little microcapillary bed around my arrow, around my flow chart. Right? And I'm going to be able to say that this is hypothalamus releases hormones into portal system. So we're putting tons of information into a smaller space. And come on, focus. My autofocus is irking my cookies here. Why do programmers always think they need to update stuff and then they break it? Anybody here a programmer? Anybody here know the answer to that? Nope. Okay. Well, just a second. I need to close this and open it again because it's not even allowing me to get to the focus button. There we go. All right. So the hypothalamus is going to release these hormones into the portal system. And where did I say those hormones are going to? What's the next organ in line? Hypothalamus is releasing, and it's not the posterior pituitary, because the posterior pituitary was the white side. So the posterior pituitary is going to be receiving electrical signals. It's the anterior pituitary. So I'm going to write ant pit. Now, probably nobody really has an ant pit, but you get my point, right? Don't always have to write everything completely out unless you need to. If you need to in order to understand your flowcharts, then do it. Now, the anterior pituitary has receptors for this hormone. What makes a target cell a target cell? I mean, receptors. It's got to have the receptors. If it's going to respond to this hypothalamic hormone, it's got to have receptors for it. But what's it going to do in response? Well, it's going to release its own hormones. Okay, so it's going to release anterior pituitary hormones, and it's a major organ of the endocrine system, so it's releasing these hormones into the bloodstream yet again. And where can blood go to? Everywhere. So we're going to write as our last thing over here, down here, we're going to say it goes to target cells. And what are those target cells going to do? Well, first, how do we know a target cell is here? got to have receptors, and target cells are going to be responding to these hormones by some sort of homeostatic regulation. So let's say, for instance, that, well, we'll come back to this. The response is always going to have a negative feedback loop. We'll get there in just 30 seconds. So target cells always are able to now give a response. Now it's going to break again. I'm just going to do this. Oops. A little irritated by this update. Response. What is that response always working to do? Well, remember, nothing in our body can work without a stimulus. So at the very, very top of this, we're always going to have a stimulus of some sort. We don't know exactly what it is, but we will end up writing it in. And that stimulus is going to act on the hypothalamus. And the response is always trying to fix the stimulus. Did that ring a bell from AMP1? Responses are always trying to do the opposite of the stimulus. And what is that term? As the response is compensating for the stimulus. What is this dashed line that I'm putting in here going to be called? Good, it's a feedback loop, and more specifically, it's a negative feedback loop. Very good. Did that ring a bell for everybody? I'll give you a second to finish writing these notes down. Effector, effector. Got it. All right. So when there's a stimulus, somehow the hypothalamus is going to detect this stimulus, and it's going to release a hormone. The hypothalamus secretes many different hormones into the portal system. It just depends on the stimulus which hormone gets released. We're going to learn a list here in just a minute, but you won't be confused because you'll have this flow chart to be able to follow no matter which hormone you're looking at. Positive feedback loops, no. There are no positive feedback loops that go through the anterior pituitary, but there is a positive feedback through the posterior pituitary. We'll get there in just a little bit. I'm sure actually the hypothalamus has some control over a positive feedback mechanism, but I'm not knowing what it is off the top of my head. And if I'm not confident off the top of my head, I'm not going to tell you. I do what I can. Yeah, one thing I learned in graduate school is to always admit when you just don't know. And it's okay. It's okay not to know. Let's see. Now, here at the anterior pituitary, it's going to respond, and its response is to release hormones into the bloodstream, and those hormones are going to go to target cells and create some sort of response. Sweet. Did that make sense? Is this a nice summary? Do you guys see the key words? Because now let's go back to our picture. And our picture shows the same thing. You just had to read between the lines for it. The hypothalamus is going to release hormones right here into this primary plexus, which are now going to move just a couple centimeters down to the anterior pituitary. And on that anterior pituitary, there are receptors for those hormones. And in response, the anterior pituitary will release hormones back out into the bloodstream, and they go whew, everywhere. What are these hormones? Here they are. Don't let your head blow up. It's not as bad as it looks. It's not as bad as it looks. Why is it not as bad as it looks? Because you have a template now that you could use for all of these hormones. Now, what did you learn with our flowchart template is that the hypothalamus always communicates with the anterior pituitary. So I got this from a textbook once upon a time, and I've kept it backwards. I don't know why, but I have. But on the right are the hormones released by the hypothalamus, and on the left are the hormones released by the anterior pituitary. My brain blows up because they are flipped, but it doesn't matter if they're flipped or not. That's the lesson of this, because when we go in to write our flow chart, what we're going to do is we're going to say, here is the hypothalamic hormone, and here is the anterior pituitary hormone that it causes to be released. Does that make sense? On the right is the hormone released by the hypothalamus, and on the left is the hormone released by the anterior pituitary. So let's look at this one. CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone. Corticotropin releasing hormone. And let's go over here. There are inhibiting hormones. There are 2 inhibiting hormones for these systems. The rest are going to be controlled by negative feedback, Heather. So this corticotropin releasing hormone, we're going to go into this one right here. This one's like the growth hormone inhibiting hormone. This is also known as somatostatin. This one's really cool, but it's also very complex. So we're going to deal a lot with that one later. I just want you guys to get to know the basics. So corticotropin releasing hormone. We'll come back to the terminology, the Latin behind all this craziness in just a little bit. Oh, actually, I want to do one more thing before I go back to my flowchart. Is there something you guys see in common between all the hypothalamic hormones? They're all releasing or inhibiting. So what you guys will be focusing on for the exams and the homework and stuff are going to be RHs. So really, when I'm looking at my flowchart over here and I'm trying to fill in my flowchart, I'm going to always be saying, okay, here's the hypothalamus. What hormone does it release? It's always going to be some RH. Does that make sense? So you can automatically fill that in. You just have to figure out which RH you're going to be dealing with. So we're going to be dealing with corticotropin releasing hormone, which is abbreviated CRH. True story? So the way this flowchart works is I have my template here. And then right here, I'm going to say what hormone is released by the hypothalamus. And therefore, it gets into that bloodstream, and it goes the couple of centimeters to the anterior pituitary. And in the anterior pituitary, there are receptors for CRH. And in response, the anterior pituitary will release its own hormone. What hormone is that? Boom. It's ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. So we go back to our flowchart and we write in ACTH. This is not acetylcholine. It's not ACH. It's ACTH. And what do we know about ACTH is now it's going to be released into the blood and it's going to go down to target cells. And you guys are going to be learning those target cells. I'll teach those to you today. Does this flowchart make sense? It's a nice, easy, efficient way to learn this material. And we'll learn what the target cells are. We're going to learn what the responses are. And for each one of these hormones, you're going to learn what the stimulus is that causes them to be released. Boom, we then have this beautiful, easy template to follow to learn all of this material. Learn it. That's the cool thing. Not just memorize, but learn. It gives you just more time to learn. All right, let's look at these words. Tropin, trophin, trophic, tropic, all of this terminology here. Anybody knows what that means in Latin? Tropin, tropic, trophic, it's all the same thing. Growth. It does have an indication that it deals with growth. That's a great answer. There's something else that you can think of with tropins, though. So all tropins are going to have some sort of change in metabolism. So that's why you're probably saying growth and food and stuff like that. But here's what it actually means. Tropin, tropic, trophic, these are Latin words, medical terms for when a hormone causes the release of another hormone. That's literally what that word, that term means. So anytime in medicine where you see the word tropin, what you're thinking of is this hormone, what function is it going to have? It's going to cause the release of another hormone. Yeah, Krushbit cycling is a protein that's acting on another protein, though. Oh, that's troponin. Dun 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 dun. Sorry, that's another one of my things. So you guys, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Carlton, my favorite, like of all time. He goes, jump on it, dun 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 dun. So I do troponin, and it works for me. So I always remember troponin. Never forget troponin. But that's not a tropin, that's troponin. So that's actually different. But I love the connection. That was great. That was great. So here we go. Corticotropin releasing hormone. So it tells you this thyrotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone. These are hormones that cause the release of another hormone. Okay, cool. We already knew that. What hormone are they going to cause the release of? Well, thyrotropin is going to act on the thyroid. Corticotropin is going to end up causing the release of cortisol in the long run. Gonadotropin goes down to the gonads and causes the release of hormones from the gonads. You guys see the connection now between these words so you can learn them a little bit better. Yes, no? So they're not as bad as they look, I promise. It just takes a little bit of time. So cortico is going to go to the anterior pituitary, and it causes the release of ACTH, which is adrenocorticotropic hormone. So now we know this is a hormone that's going to cause the release of another hormone. Where's it going to be acting on? The adrenal glands. And what hormone is it going to cause the release of? Cortisol. Make sense? Awesome job, Heather. Does that make sense to everybody? Give me a yes or a no or a Dr. H, you're crazy. I don't mind that though. And so let's go into the target cells for ACTH real quick. Did I do that here? No, it's somewhere else. This one has growth hormone. So we'll go to down here. So cortisol. Cortisol is kind of the penultimate hormone. We're going to come back to the gist of cortisol in just a little bit, but I have a lot of information for you guys on cortisol. I have all the target cells and everything like that. It's all bundled up into one nice flow chart, which you have a template to help you guys understand a little bit better too. Here is this same flow chart that we've been drawing out, except this one has hypothalamus releases, anterior pituitary releases, so forth, so on, okay? But cortisol, what I want to remind you guys of from yesterday's lecture is you guys actually learned where cortisol is released from. Do you guys remember this table? Do you guys remember these striations of the adrenal gland? And I went through GFR in lab. And I said that G secretes aldosterone, F secretes cortisol. So where are the receptors for ACTH? Found within the zona fasciculata. Does that make sense? Trying to tie all these puzzle pieces together. Yes, no, maybe so? The target cells, where are they? They're in the zona fasciculata, which is found in the adrenal cortex. Now, what is the adrenal cortex going to do? What's the zona fasciculata going to do in response It's going to secrete what hormone as a response? Yeah, not just any steroid though, cortisol. You guys good? Trying to go slow, but I can't go too slow because time limitations. It's going to secrete cortisol. Now, yeah, you guys already probably know the basics of cortisol, right? It's called your stress hormone. Is the one most people associate with stress. We'll come back to why that's both a good thing and a bad thing. You need to be able to respond to stress. Cortisol is essential for life. If you lose you die. If you lose cortisol, you die. You must have cortisol for life. Cortisol, though, what's the body going to try to do if cortisol levels get too high? Bring it back down. Yeah, increase, decrease, no change. It's going to try to bring it back down. So how's it going to do that? Well, remember, what do we have in place? We have a negative feedback loop. So cortisol levels get too high. We have receptors for cortisol in the anterior pituitary and in the hypothalamus. And when cortisol levels get too high, what is the hypothalamus going to be doing to CRH secretion? Increase, decrease, no change. And what is the anterior pituitary going to be doing to ACTH secretion? Increase, decrease, no change. Wonderful, which is now going to help try to bring cortisol levels back down again. See? Oh no. And we could do this exact same thing for each one of these hormones. For instance, let's go and talk about growth hormone releasing hormone. By the way, we'll end up throwing in some stimuli for this cortisol flow chart in just a little bit. But let's go ahead and do growth hormone releasing hormone. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys just a couple of minutes, okay? Maybe 3 minutes or so. Hold on. I have a visitor. Come here, sweetie. Here's my visitor. This is my little 20-month-old. She brought me food. Can I eat some? Yeah. You want some? Oh, I don't want your wub. Thank you. It's a little gross. Oh, thanks. Do you want some? So yummy. All right. Can you say bye-bye? I only have so much time. I had to get back to work. Can you say bye-bye? Saying thank you for bringing wubs. Here, let's put them in your shirt. Let's put them in your shirt. All right. Go out and play. Go out and play. Can you take your food? Here you go. Thank you, love bug. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. She's my little sweet pea. All right, back to it. I'm even scrubbier today. Online teaching. I could hide behind a computer screen. It's legal. Okay, cool. Back to the grind here. What we're going to do is we're now going to fill in this same template for growth hormone. How cool to have one thing you could use to study and be able to work with that. I love it. I love it. This is what made my life more simple as a student because I ain't that smart. But when I find nice, easy ways to learn, man, your brain can hold on to this. So for growth hormone, the hypothalamus is going to be secreting a hormone. It's going to be a RH. We know it's going to be an RH if it's going to stimulate something to be released. And what we're going to be stimulating is growth hormone. So it's growth hormone releasing hormone. Where did we get a no from? I'm sorry. What did I miss? Did I miss something? Help me, Tariq. I don't know what's going on. I'm so confused. Can you hear me? It does, but oh, um, no, a good point. They're not all tropic words. It is still technically a tropin, though. It's just not in the name. I know that's a little bit weird. The connection isn't there for growth hormone, and it doesn't work for prolactin either. But yeah, it's the connection's not. Welcome to physiology, where not everything's perfect. I can teach you guys a few little cheats, but those cheats don't always work. Okay. This is growth hormone releasing hormone. It will, and the reason why it's not a tropin is because what we're going to go to next is the final hormone. Do you guys notice here in corticotropin releasing hormone that this caused a hormone to be released that then caused another hormone to release? So there are 3 hormones in that line. Yes, no? This one causes ACTH, then cortisol. So there are 3 hormones in that line. Well, growth hormone releasing hormone is going to be secreted by the hypothalamus, and it's going to go to the anterior pituitary, and it secretes growth hormone. And that's the final hormone in this chain, and that's why it's not a tropin. Does that, I know it doesn't make perfect sense, but does that kind of make sense that there's a difference between the two? Cool. It's still going to go down and talk to target cells. But here's the deal with growth hormone. What cells in your body like to grow? Don't be confused by the question. What cells in your body like to grow? All of them. You got it. So where are we going to find receptors for growth hormone? Everywhere. From your brain exactly to your bones and hair and skin and fat. It's the whole body. Does that make sense? All cells of the body have receptors for growth hormone. Yes, no? And what are these cells going to do in response? What is their response? Well, good thing the name has something going in there. It's growth, okay? It's growth. There is a lot more going on with these responses than we're going to, immediately get to here. There's a lot related to metabolism, and we're going to talk about how metabolism is acted on by these hormones as soon as I possibly can. Growth. But if I'm going to have growth, I'm going to need more energy, aren't I? Yes? And so really the function of growth hormone isn't growth. That's a really, blasé oversimplification of everything. It's going to affect growth by affecting metabolism. So it's going to cause a lot of things like the breakdown of fats, breakdown of, or the release of new glucose, because we need glucose for energy. We start making ATP somehow. So we're going to end up having a response down here based off of a lot of this relationship with energy. All right, how do you guys feel about this flowchart and using it to learn all of these different hormones? Alyssa, I got a meh? Oh, bummer. It just takes practice. It just takes practice. Practice? You talking about practice? All right, that was a Allen Iverson quote. In case you guys didn't know that. Practice? I'm a sports fanatic, so you guys know what I'm talking about. Practice? You talking about practice? It's all right. It's a little bit old school now, but this is AI. We talking about practice? Yeah. So he skipped some practice and he got like massively fined for skipping practice, and the media was hounding him about it, and he was like, practice? We talking about practice? And it just became like this big, huge, basically meme before memes even existed. So, all right, cool. We're going to come back and we're going to be dealing more with these hormones in just a minute. Let's finish our basic anatomy lesson. Hypothalamus and posterior pituitary. Short-term memory for y'all. What do we know about the infundibulum? What is traveling down through the infundibulum from the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary? Lovely. They're axons. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the hormones released by the posterior pituitary are not made by the posterior pituitary. They are made by the hypothalamus. They are made by two very specific nuclei, subnuclei of the hypothalamus, called the paraventricular nucleus and the supraoptic nucleus. And these nuclei found in the hypothalamus produce the hormones, package them in vesicles, and then transport them inside those axons down to the terminal boutons, where they wait. And they wait. And they're waiting for an electrical signal. And when the electrical signal goes down, we got your typical synapse, right? Voltage-gated calcium channels, calcium influx, driving exocytosis, like we talked about yesterday. This is a much simpler mechanism than the hypothalamic anterior pituitary axis. This is just your nervous system function that hopefully you remember a little bit about from AMP1. What two hormones are secreted? Oxytocin is secreted by the paraventricular nucleus. I guess synthesized by the paraventricular nucleus would be a better way to say it, not secreted by. It's secreted by the posterior pituitary. And the other one is called ADH, where ADH stands for anti-diuretic hormone. Anti-diuretic hormone. Now let's go ahead and start with anti-diuretic hormone. This is one you're going to need to know for the entire semester. You cannot mess around with ADH. I repeat, you must know it, you must know it, you must know it, you must know it, you must know it. You guys will get the point. You must know it. So what is anti-diuretic hormone? It's also known as vasopressin. And that's part of its functionality. It's actually the first name that ADH had, but they ended up changing it to ADH because it was more accurate to the physiology of the hormone. ADH. Anybody know what happens if you take a diuretic? What's going to happen to your body if you take a diuretic? Yeah, you pee. You pee more. In other words, your body excretes water. Makes you lose water. That's a great way to think about it too. Yes, no? Are you guys with me? Your body releases water with a diuretic. Water's got to come from somewhere. So please pay attention here. If I pee more, where is that water coming from? Yeah, exactly. We'll talk about that. Where is lovely, Heather? Students sometimes have this disconnect between pee and blood, and you shouldn't. Pee and blood are coming from the same water source. Okay, your body only has so much water. A lot of that water is being circulated through the bloodstream. We pee because our kidneys are filtering our blood. And let me tell you guys this number right now, and you can write it down right now and be amazed by this number right now, is that your kidneys filter 180 liters of blood every day. 180 liters. Now, some of you guys are like, I don't know what a liter is. Imagine a 2-liter Coke bottle sitting on the grocery shelf, And now imagine 90 of those sitting side by side, and that's how much blood your body is filtering every day. It's amazing. And do you pee 180 liters per day? Yes or no? No. You only pee about a liter to a liter and a half per day. So almost all of that blood that's being filtered by the kidneys got to go back into the bloodstream, because if it doesn't, we got problems. So a diuretic makes you pee more. Awesome, Tariq. Thanks. A diuretic makes you pee more. We need to have a hormone in our body that can help us regulate our blood volume. And we can regulate our blood volume by communicating with our kidneys, and therefore we can regulate our urine volume. Do you guys see the connection between the two? Anti-diuretic hormone is going to make us pee less. And if we peed less, what's going to happen to our blood volume? Increase, decrease, no change relative to normal. Lovely. So the function of ADH is to help to increase water retention in the blood. So ADH, and we're going to learn how it does it later, increases water retention in the blood. Okay? Big, big time functionality. You must know, you must know, you must know. It's got a ton of target cells. Everything from your blood vessels to your kidneys is affected by ADH. Now, one last bit of detail that helps students understand ADH a little bit better is there's a lot of ADH inhibitors out there. A lot of ADH inhibitors out there. Who wants to guess two of the most common ADH inhibitors? Just guess, just for fun. It's for fun. Mm-hmm. All right, so I know everybody got to be 21 or over, of course. But anybody that's ever drank alcohol, you guys, you know, right? They got to start to pee, and then when you break the seal, you're peeing like crazy. Yeah, alcohol is an ADH inhibitor. That's why alcohol makes you pee more. Exactly. And then coffee. Coffee is a very potent ADH inhibitor. Oh, Lasix. So no, Lasix is not an ADH inhibitor. I love that you said that. We'll actually do a case study on Lasix later this semester if you guys want to do it. Lasix is also known as furosemide. It's a pharmaceutical agent that is it's called a loop diuretic because it's going to act on a different part of your kidney. Okay, so it's not acting on ADH, but great connection, Alyssa. Love that you said that. But I hope that helped though. Coffee and alcohol, ADH inhibitors. Nice table that puts these two things together. You notice how I have not talked much about oxytocin? Does that tell you guys something about its presence on the exams? I try to be pretty straightforward because, you know, exams are tough enough as they are. You probably aren't going to get tested a lot on oxytocin. It is super important. Don't get me wrong. It's just not. It's not necessarily going to be tested on. There's only so much things that I can test on. Oxytocin is super cool. Oxytocin actually has a lot of happiness factors that go along with it, oddly enough. If you could boost your oxytocin, you can actually be happier. But women, sometimes there can be some adverse effects of oxytocin boosting in women, like uterine cramping. Why? Because oxytocin is what is being induced when there's a baby that's ready to be given birth to. Oxytocin is that hormone that causes the uterus to start to contract to help with childbirth. And it's oxytocin that we're going to be having a positive feedback mechanism with. What is positive feedback? Yeah, Pitocin. It's the exact same thing. Now, Pitocin is a synthetic version of oxytocin. So Pitocin is made in a lab. That's the difference between oxytocin and Pitocin. But they're literally the exact same chemical structure. Literally. So let me just grab a quick scratch piece of paper here. Just a quick reminder on positive feedback loops, right? You got your set point, you got your max, you got your min. And remember, the body would normally, if the if whatever was going above set point, body temperature would be an example. The body would normally try to bring that back down to set point. But in a positive feedback mechanism, when it breaks through this bubble right here, it's going to go where it continues in an upward manner, and then it's going to check in and say, has the problem been fixed? So for instance, with oxytocin, the problem is there's a baby. That's a problem. And the body's trying to get it the hell out, right? It's eviction time. That wasn't a very nice way to put it, but you get my point. So the body's going to start releasing oxytocin. Big, huge uterine cramp. Then it's going to check in. It's going to say, is the baby gone? Nope. Check in. Is the baby gone? Nope. Check in. Is the baby gone? If the answer is yes, returns back to normal. Positive feedback loops. Does that make sense? Exactly, Jennifer. It increases the stimulus. So this is one of the few examples of positive feedback loops in the body. We got oxytocin and uterine contractions. We got blood clotting. We got action potentials. These are positive feedback loops. Okay. Let's keep going. 10 o'clock. So let's focus a little bit more on growth hormone today. Everybody ready? I'm going to start firing some questions at you because that's what I do. Look at the first bullet point. It's a protein hormone. So what does that tell you about it? Is it polar or non-polar? Is it water soluble or lipid soluble? Let's go. This is a short-term memory from yesterday. Redundancy is the key to learning. Lovely. Everybody's getting it. It's polar. It's hydrophilic. So can that dissolve in water? Yes or no? Sure it can, because water is polar. So will it be stored inside of a vesicle? Yes or no? Hold on. Stored inside of a vesicle. It must be stored inside of a vesicle, correct? Remember, as the cell makes it, as the neuron makes it, it can't release a protein hormone unless that protein hormone goes through the process of exocytosis. Were you all able to make that connection based off of one of the graphs we did yesterday, one of the figures? Proteins are too big, so we must store those proteins. We go back to this yesterday just to ring a bell here, right? Proteins are too big. So as proteins are made, they're going to have to get packaged in vesicles. You know it's, Heather, were you at yesterday's lecture? I can't remember. Yeah, exactly, because you emailed me. Go back and watch that. We know it's polar because it's a protein. Proteins are large and in charge. All proteins are really big, and they're going to have big, heavy charges hanging off of them. And the definition, by definition, polarity means charges, right? As we separate charges from one another, that is what the word polar even means. So the more charges something has, the more polarity it has. And water is polar, therefore a polar molecule can dissolve into the water. So, I mean, that's what I love about the way I hope you guys are learning is that when you see a key word now, like protein hormone, it tells you a lot more than just, it's a protein hormone. Now you guys can go through a chain. Just from one key word, you can say, well, this is polar. Ah, well, it must have been stored in a vesicle and released by exocytosis. And when it got into the bloodstream, can it dissolve with the plasma? Yes or no? Oh, yeah. Is it going to have a relatively fast level of degradation? What's its half-life? Short? Does it have a short half-life or a long half-life? Yes, super short. It's all right, Parker, no worries, man. These proteins are not protected by anything. And so they're just passing through the liver, they're passing through the kidney, they're going to be degraded really fast. And when they make it to the target cell, where are their receptors going to be found? On the cell membrane or inside the cell? Their protein, can they pass through the cell membrane? No. Hold on. So for anybody that is even remotely confused here, can a protein just pass through the cell membrane? We got a peanut butter sandwich here. So where are the receptors going to be found? If it cannot, no vesicles to get inside the cell. That's not how hormones work. You're not remaking a vesicle. There's no endocytotic, clathrin-coated crap going on with these hormones. So what we have is right on that plasma membrane, we're going to have receptors for that hormone. Does that make sense to everybody? Based again on yesterday's lecture. Sweet. If you have any problems with that at all, just let me know. Let me know. Let me know. I'm here to help. All cells have receptors for growth hormone. One of the most important places that growth hormone goes to is the liver. Let's go back here and let's write that in. So all cells, but we also got our near and dear to our hearts, always the bridesmaid, never the bride, the liver. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. I'm going to sometimes just give you guys hints this semester where I'll say, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. What does so much damn work in the body but doesn't get credit for it? Our liver. Now, the liver does lots of things, but one, and remember yesterday, let's go this route. 90% of blood proteins are produced by which organ? Just the redundancy, type it in just so you guys remember. 90% of all blood proteins are produced by the liver. So the liver produces lots of different blood proteins. One of those blood proteins that it produces is a protein called IGF, which is insulin growth factor. It's not insulin. It doesn't act like insulin per se. It's just called insulin growth factor. I don't know. Physiologists are always very good at naming stuff. I mean, it's got some small function in storage of stuff, so I guess that's why. Now, insulin growth factor, this IGFs, these are required for growth. So the growth hormone acts on the cells, and the IGF being released by the liver is going to go act on those cells. And that IGF is going to allow for growth hormone to have and act on growth. Does that make sense? They're going to be permissive to one another. One is going to permit the other one to do its job, and you need both for proper growth. See or no? Lovely. All right. Here's what I was mentioning yesterday in lecture 2, is that growth hormone is regulated by a number of things. But one of the primary things that regulates growth hormone release is your circadian rhythm, your internal clock. So if you look at this graph, most of the day, we're getting these little spikes in growth hormone, especially around after we've eaten. But look at where we get this huge spike of growth hormone, somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m. This should make it clear to almost everybody that in order to have proper growth, we need proper sleep. Again, I am a failure at that. But I am a stickler with my kids. I make sure they go to sleep on schedule, and I let them sleep as long as they want. The only reason why is because at a young age, kids need to develop. They have to have brain growth. They have to have muscle growth. They got to have their normal growth, and they need sleep for that. Okay? Do you guys see the circadian rhythm involved in this? We are a part of circadian rhythm. Okay, so the next slides, you're going to be learning some words. So don't freak out. Freak out. We want to settle down and learn some words real quick. Because when you look at this, you're going to go, lipogen, what is going on? Glycogen, what? All of these words end up looking very similar to one another when you just, go cross-eyed. So let's learn some Latin. I think this helps. I've found in the past that it does. Lipo. What does the word lipo tell anybody? Liposuction, for instance. Yeah, lipo means fat. Okay, to be more specific, lipo is triglycerides, which is stored fat. Triglycerides. Triglycerides have a glycerol, which is actually a type of carbohydrate, and attached to this, there are 3 fatty acids. Fatty acids. There are 3 fatty acids. You guys may or may not remember this. You may or may not have learned this, but fatty acids are really important for the Krebs cycle. Do you guys remember hearing that word Krebs cycle? And maybe I hopefully didn't put anybody into a, some sort of, anaphylactic shock in case you're allergic to the Krebs cycle. Some sort of PTSD. But fatty acids are really important for making ATP. They're all about it. So the more fatty acids that are released into your bloodstream, the more ATP can be produced. The glycerol that's up here, this glycerol is also an available energy source. So this glycerol can go to your liver and get converted into glucose. So this glycerol can go to your liver, and when it does, it can make brand new glucose. Your body is a beautiful thing. We're constantly going through chemical conversions to make what we need. So what did you just learn about triglycerides? Is that triglycerides are stored energy. True story? That these fatty acids down here can go into the Krebs cycle, which produces like 36 ATP per cycle. It's ridiculous how much ATP the Krebs cycle is making. What is required to make ATP? Glucose. And we can help make new glucose from this stored fat. What happens when you consume more glucose than your body needs? What do we store that glucose away as? Do we pee it all out? Nope. Heather, your body can only store so much glucagon, but I do love, well, glucagon is actually a hormone. It's glycogen, but we'll get there in just a second. Yeah, it's going to store as much glycogen as it can, but normally your glycogen levels are pretty good. Everything else gets converted to fat, which is long-term glucose storage. Why? Because we can take this fat and we can reconvert it back into glucose. You guys all with me? Just a little bit? Oh yeah, good old keto. Don't get me started on keto. Okay. And that all stemmed from one key word, which is lipo. What? So let's go to a next keyword. Let's go lysis. Let's use this cool burnt orange thingy. I don't know what color this is, but lysis. What does the word lysis mean? Great, 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 great. Break down, okay? To break. Break down, break it down. So we're breaking it down. So if I were to combine these words, lipo, lysis, lipolysis, what are we breaking down, y'all? Fat. And what are we going to get when we break that fat down? We're going to get glycerol. Actually, I should draw the arrow that way. We're going to get glycerol, and we're going to get fatty acids. So in the long run, when we break fat down, what's the whole idea? What's the body trying to make more of? ATP, energy. Lipolysis is all about increasing the amount of energy availability in the body. See or no? Next, genesis. What does genesis mean? Means creation. It actually doesn't mean new, Alyssa. There's another word you guys are about to learn that does mean new. Genesis means to create or creation. So lipogenesis would be the creation of new triglycerides. Glycogen. Glycogen is one that I always assume students know about, and then I realize really fast that they don't. If you didn't take like an introduction to AMP course, like, you know, basics in biology class, then you probably haven't learned about glycogen. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, glycogen is stored glucose. They're big, long chains of glucose. It's glucose bound to glucose, 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 bound to glucose. Millions of glucoses bound together is called glycogen, and they're stored in the liver and skeletal muscles. Because what is glucose good for? ATP, right? We are going to be taking that glucose and we're going to be needing it sometimes. So what if we had glycogenesis? What are we making more of? What if we had glycogenesis? No, we're not making more glucose. Work with me. The word glycogen and genesis together is glycogenesis. So what are we making more of? Did that make sense? Because the root of the word is glycogen. Glycogenesis is making more glycogen. Yes, no? I only got one person answering me right now, but did that make sense? Now, what about glycogenolysis? What about glycogenolysis? Where the hell's my lysis? Glycogenolysis, what are we doing? We're breaking glycogen down and therefore releasing what into the bloodstream? We're not releasing ATP yet. Sabrina, great connection though. That's long stream down there, but we're going to be releasing glucose first, and then it goes to make ATP, Sabrina. So great job. I'm not trying to tell you you're wrong, but what's actually released into the bloodstream is glucose. Yes? You guys good? All right, one last word. Somebody else said this as a definition for something else, but NEO. I guess two more. We'll go ahead and do two more. NEO This is new. Wasn't Neo like the name of somebody in the Matrix? Like maybe the main character, I can't remember. But anyways, yeah, so I mean the whole idea was in the Matrix is like he was new to this world, so it was kind of a play on words, whatever. Gluco, of course. Gluco. Not glyco, not glycogen, but just straight gluco. Gluco is, as you guys might assume, a Latin shortened word for glucose. So here we go. We got a big, huge list of words that we can start to tie together. So what if I were to say, and I've already kind of started to mention these, let's go with lipolysis, lipolysis. Boom. We got the breakdown of triglycerides, releasing glycerol, releasing fatty acids, and we're going to help make new ATP. What if we had glycogenolysis? Glycogenolysis. Now we're breaking down glycogen. And it's really this simple for a lot of these things. What about the hardest one is gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis. Creation of new glucose. What that means is it was not glucose originally. Remember, glycogen is glucose originally. What was not glucose? Oh, you guys see how in the triglycerides, the glycerol goes to the liver and the liver makes brand new glucose? Well, son of a biscuit eater, that's gluconeogenesis. So when the liver converts glycerol into glucose, it's undergoing gluconeogenesis. Yes? One more thing can go through gluconeogenesis. I'm going to go ahead and write it in up here, and I'll use a gray for this. Proteins. Your proteins can be used for making glucose. You can actually take your protein and you break it down. There's no fancy combination of words for this. It's called protein catabolism. Catabolism is an energetic chemical reaction that is breakdown, right? If we catabolize something, we break it down. An anabolic reaction is one where we build it up. A catabolic reaction is one where we break it down. And in protein catabolism, all proteins are made out of amino acids, so we break the proteins down into small amino acids. And now our body can take these amino acids, which are an amine group, a nitrogen group, right? And an acid group. Well, it can get rid of the acid, cleave that acid off, and all we're left with, so I don't know what you guys do or don't remember about amino acids. I don't want to get into it too much. I don't want to make this too confusing. But if you remember, the building block for the entire body is carbon. Yeah? Right? This is biology in general. Carbon is like the core of everything. And glucose, if we wanted to write glucose down as a molecular formula, we would write what? Who knows? C what? C6H12O6. Kind of ring a bell? If not, that's it. If you've never learned that before, I do recommend you learn it. It's an important one. So there's carbons, there's hydrogens, and there's oxygens. Without going into the exact composition of amino acids, because amino acids are, there's 20 of them. The core of all amino acids is they have a nitrogen, they have carbons, They have oxygens and they have hydrogens. Carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens for glucose. What do we need to get rid of in order to get carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens? What do we need to get rid of? We got to get rid of the nitrogen. So the body is going to go through a chemical reaction that causes what's called deamination. And deamination removes the nitrogen from the carbons and the oxygens and the hydrogens. And we can now take these and convert them to glucose. Yay! Do you see how that is gluconeogenesis? We've made glucose from something that was not glucose. Yes, no, maybe so? You don't need to know all the chemistry. You will not be tested on all this chemistry. I just want you guys to learn. And when you learn like this, what I'm going to now go back and show you is, and this will be the last thing, then we can go ahead and be done for today, is that there's a purpose for my madness, I promise. Now, when we start looking at growth hormone, what do you need when you're growing? Do you need more energy or less energy? If you're trying to go through cellular division, we need more energy. So what do we want to do with fats? Do we want to break them down or do we want to build them up? And what do we call that? Lipolysis. Sweet. We'll come back to the muscles in just a second. Now, what about in the liver? We want to store more glucose away, or do we want to get glucose out? Remember, glucose is stored in the liver in the form of glycogen. So do we want glycogenesis or do we want glycogenolysis? I know it's a long word. Type it out. Memory. Redundancy is the key to learning. You're going to hear me say that 1,400 million times. So again, we want to release energy, y'all. We want to release energy. We don't want to store it away. We don't want to create glycogen, because if we create glycogen, we're taking glucose and we're binding them together. So we're going to be pulling glucose out of the blood. We're going to have less available glucose if we make more glycogen. Does that make sense? If we made more glycogen, we would have less available glucose because it's stored away as another chemical. Are you guys with me? Bree, did that make sense? Awesome. So the answer is, if we want to release glucose, we need to have glycogenolysis. So we're going to increase glucose output by glycogenolysis. Sweet. Now, when we're breaking down fats, and you guys are going to see that growth hormone also causes protein catabolism, when we're breaking down fats, we're going to send the glycerol to the liver, and protein catabolism is going to end up making new glucose too. And what is the formation of brand new glucose called? Gluconeogenesis. So I hope what you guys are going to get out of this lesson is that this list of words here is going to be very helpful for what you're learning with all of these different hormones. Proof in the pudding, what does that even mean? Whatever, is that when we get, say for instance, to cortisol, which is your stress hormone, guess what words we're going to be using? Stress is all about energy. So you're going to be using gluconeogenesis and protein catabolism, protein degradation, and lipolysis, and so forth, so on. So if you're stressed, if you're running from Mr. Axeman, is my term for fight or flight. You're going to hear me say running from the grizzly bear, running from the lion, running from Mr. Axeman's my go-to. Got to call him Mr. That's the polite thing to do. So you're running from Mr. Axeman. Do you want more energy or do you want less energy? Gotta have more. Gotta have more. So things like norepinephrine and epinephrine are going to cause more energy to be released. Cortisol, stress. More energy needs to be released when you're stressed out. So which of these is going to be happening? Are we going to be storing fats away? Or are we going to be breaking fats down? Lysis or genesis? L or G? You guys remember, abbreviation's good. Yeah, so we're going to, exactly. So for norepinephrine, epinephrine, cortisol, growth hormone, you guys see that these all have this, we need to release energy in common. So they're all going to have lipolysis. They're all going to have gluconeogenesis. They're all going to stop the creation of new glycogen and the creation of new fats. So this is going to be the link between all of these different hormones. It's going to be a beautiful thing. Because ultimately, because we have released more energy, what can our body do? It can now grow. Once it has the energy available, we can now go through mitosis, cellular differentiation, make new proteins, make new bone, make new muscle, make new cartilage, make new fats. Once we have released the energy, we can do what we will with that energy. Does that make sense? Hormones are almost all about energy, and that's something that people tend to lose sight of. Here is the flow chart that ties this all together. Okay, these are my faves. I love these things. They're very similar to the flow charts we've been drawing, but these now have everything. Stimuli for growth hormone. You will need to know these for the exam. The hypothalamus detects the stimulus. It's going to secrete GRH into the bloodstream. It travels a couple of centimeters down to the anterior pituitary, where it causes the anterior pituitary to release growth hormone. Growth hormone goes to the liver and all the rest of the cells of the body. The liver now is going to secrete IGFs into the bloodstream, and the combination of the two are going to act on all of the tissues, go back, to increase growth and development, new cells, and release more energy. Increase glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis, make sure we're not forming new glycogen, releasing triglycerides from fats, not building new fats yet, and we now have all of the connections for all these crazy dots. I hope that all made sense. I hope you guys have a feel for the foundational knowledge that you can now expand upon. What you will definitely need to have for the exam is this flow chart fully understood. And we today have gone through and step by step discussed each part of this flow chart, and now it's all put together into one puzzle. It will take practice, but I'm here to help. I'm here to help. Remember, if you guys want to contact me, do you email me or do you text me? Just as a reminder. Text. I don't check emails very often. Just I always want to remind you guys of that. Text me with questions. Text me with questions. My cell phone number is on the syllabus. So Heather, you're new. I'm not sure if you saw that in my emails and stuff, but please text me. My phone number is on the syllabus. I think I also sent it in one of the announcements. Text me. Text me pictures of the homework problems you're having trouble with, or you know, your whiteboards or whatever. You know, just be like, WTF, Dr. H, I need help. I need help. And I'll reach out as soon as I possibly can to help you. And then tables, and by the way, here's the table for all of the information for growth hormone. But I hate tables, but some students love them. So I always put them into my lectures, but I hate them. All right, so on Monday of next week, we're diving right back into this. Monday of next week, what we're going to go ahead and do is we will get into endocrine 3. And what you're going to see in endocrine 3 is a lot of the same stuff. Where, say, for instance, in thyroid hormone, guess what? There's a hormone released by the hypothalamus that talks to the anterior pituitary, which now goes down to target organs and target cells. Boom. So, perfect. Oh, yeah. There's a group me. Tariq, can you go ahead and, poor Tariq. Can you link that one more time for those that have not joined? Thanks, bud. Cool. For anybody else that needs to boogie out, get on out of here. I'm done for the day. Please, summer goes fast. Study this weekend. This is not one that you can put off. Remember, you want at least 30 hours of studying per week if you can handle that. I know it's not easy, but that's the price that you pay when you're a student. And I'm not trying to be mean or anything. I'm just trying to be honest. It takes time. And even, cool. And even though my tests are not proctored, even though they're open note, you got to know where in your notes the information is if you're going to do well on my exams. So please study, learn, and enjoy. Adios. Have a great weekend. Text me if you need help. Start your homework. Bye, y'all.